Hi, I'm Aria Wright and I'm 29 years old. 3 hours before our engagement party, they cornered me in the wine cellar like I was some kind of pest they'd finally decided to exterminate. His father, Charles Blackwood, slid a thick manila envelope across the antique oak table, his smile as cold as the champagne bottles lining the walls. "Sign it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of generations of old money, "or there won't be an engagement to celebrate tonight." Marcus stood beside him like a shadow, his hands buried deep in his pockets, eyes fixed on the marble floor beneath his feet. When I looked at him, really looked, waiting for him to say something, anything, he just shrugged and whispered, "Maybe it's for the best, Arya. You know how complicated things can get." If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, comment below where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready to see how I fought back. Because sometimes showing them who you really are is the only way to win. They thought I was just another small-town girl who'd gotten lucky. A waitress from nowhere who'd somehow charmed their golden boy. But I had $127 million in cryptocurrency, a network of lawyers who owed me favors, and a plan that had been 3 years in the making. So tell me, have you ever smiled while watching everything you thought you wanted crumble to pieces in your hands? Because this isn't a love story. It's a demolition. And it starts right here. I didn't flinch, not even when Charles leaned back in his leather chair with that satisfied smirk he'd probably inherited along with his trust fund. I simply stood up, smoothed down my emerald silk dress, the one Marcus had bought me for our 6-month anniversary, and picked up the envelope like it was made of glass. "I'll need to review this," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Alone." Charles's laugh was sharp, cutting through the musty air of the wine cellar. "Review? Darling, this isn't a negotiation. It's a formality." But I was already walking toward the door, my heels clicking against the stone floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind me, I heard Marcus clear his throat nervously, probably wondering if he should follow me or stay with Daddy Dearest. The powder room on the second floor of the Blackwood mansion was all marble and gold fixtures, designed to intimidate. I locked the door behind me and stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror. My dark hair was still perfectly styled, my makeup flawless, but my green eyes held something that hadn't been there an hour ago. Not anger, that would come later. This was clarity. I opened the envelope with surgical precision. The contract was exactly what I'd expected, 37 pages of legal jargon designed to strip me of everything I'd ever earn, inherit, or even dream of touching. There were clauses about lifestyle maintenance, behavioral expectations, and my personal favorite, a section that would require me to get Charles's written permission before making any purchase over $500. They'd even included a morality clause that would void any financial support if I was seen conducting myself in a manner unbefitting the Blackwood name. I pulled out my phone, not the rose gold iPhone Marcus had given me last Christmas, but the black burner I kept hidden in a compartment I'd sewn into every purse I owned. Old habits from a life they knew nothing about. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Phoenix Legal, this is Victoria." "It's me," I said, keeping my voice low. "They just handed me the contract." Victoria Chen had been my attorney for 5 years, ever since I'd made my first million trading crypto in college. She was brilliant, ruthless, and had a particular hatred for old money trying to bully new money. "Tell me you didn't sign anything. Please. You trained me better than that." I flipped through the pages again, photographing each one with the phone's camera. "They want everything, Vic. Assets, autonomy, dignity, the whole package." "Standard rich boy protection plan," she said, and I could hear her typing in the background. "How much do they think you're worth?" "Based on this contract? Maybe 50,000 in the bank and whatever tip money I made slinging coffee." I laughed softly. "They have no idea about the portfolios, the investments, or the property holdings." "Good. Keep it that way. I'm sending you the counterproposal we drafted last month. Same terms but flipped. If he signs it, you proceed with the engagement. If he doesn't..." She paused dramatically. "Well, let's just say his family's about to learn why you never corner a predator unless you're sure you can kill it." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into its hidden pocket. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of what was happening. 3 years of my life, 3 years of playing the part of the grateful girlfriend who'd struck gold. 3 years of pretending that Marcus's casual condescension was charming, that his mother's snide comments about my background were just protective instincts, that his father's need to control every aspect of our relationship was normal. But I wasn't the same naive 26-year-old who'd fallen for Marcus's charm at that charity gala. I'd learned to listen when people thought I wasn't paying attention. I'd discovered that silence made them comfortable enough to reveal their true thoughts. And most importantly, I'd learned that the only person who could protect Aria Wright was Aria Wright. I touched up my lipstick, straightened my shoulders, and walked back downstairs. The main living room buzzed with pre-party energy, catering staff arranging flowers, bartenders polishing glasses, musicians setting up in the corner. Everything looked perfect on the surface, just like the Blackwood family itself. Marcus was standing by the grand piano, drink in hand, laughing at something his college roommate had said. When he saw me approaching, his smile faltered slightly. "Hey, babe. All good?" I nodded, slipping my arm through his. Just needed a moment to process everything. I looked around the room, taking in the opulent decorations, the family portraits dating back generations, the obvious display of wealth and power. This is quite a contract your father put together. Yeah, well, you know how he is about protecting the family assets. Marcus took a sip of his whiskey, avoiding my eyes. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if systematically stripping away someone's financial independence could ever be anything but personal. Of course not, I agreed, my voice sweet as honey. I'm sure he's just looking out for everyone's best interests. Charles appeared at my elbow as if summoned. I trust you've had time to review everything? The guests will be arriving soon, and I'd prefer to have this matter settled before the festivities begin. I smiled up at him, the same warm smile I'd been perfecting for 3 years. Actually, I have a few questions about some of the clauses. Nothing major, just want to make sure I understand everything correctly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What kind of questions? Well, Section 15 mentions that any premarital assets I bring to the marriage would be subject to joint management. I was hoping you could clarify what exactly that means. I tilted my head innocently, as if I truly didn't understand the implications. Charles exchanged a look with Marcus. It's quite straightforward, my dear. Any significant assets would be managed by the family's financial team to ensure proper oversight. Significant assets, I repeated thoughtfully. And what would you consider significant? Just so I know what I'd need to disclose. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me. Aria, you don't really have anything that would fall under that category, do you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was it, the moment where I could either continue playing the role of the naive girlfriend or begin revealing who I really was. I chose a middle path. Well, I do have some investments I made with my savings from the restaurant. Nothing major, but I want to be transparent about everything. I paused, watching their faces carefully. There's also the matter of the property my grandmother left me in Vermont. It's just a small cabin, but technically it's real estate. Charles waved dismissively. A cabin in Vermont hardly constitutes a significant asset. I'm sure we can handle such minor holdings without much fuss. Minor holdings. If only he knew that my minor holdings included a portfolio worth more than his father's entire estate, cryptocurrency investments that had made me independently wealthy, and that small cabin, which was actually a 100-acre compound I'd been developing as a private retreat. But tonight wasn't about revealing my hand, it was about watching them reveal theirs. That's such a relief, I said, placing my hand on Charles's arm. I was worried you might think I was trying to hide something important. The first guests began arriving at 7, and I slipped into the role I'd perfected over the past 3 years. Gracious, charming, just successful enough to be interesting but not threatening. I mingled with Marcus's friends from Yale, discussed art with his mother's book club, and smiled politely while his cousins made jokes about trading up from their previous girlfriends. But I was also listening. Really listening. to the way they spoke about money, about people they considered beneath them, about what they thought I brought to the relationship beyond decorative value. Every comment, every sideways glance, every poorly concealed sneer was catalogued and filed away. "She's certainly prettier than his last one," I heard Marcus's aunt whisper to her husband near the bar. "Pretty, yes, but what's her family like?" Charles mentioned something about a restaurant. The husband's tone made it sound like I'd crawled out of a sewer. "Service industry," she replied with a delicate shudder. "At least she seems to know her place." I kept smiling, kept nodding at appropriate moments in my conversation with the museum curator Marcus's mother had introduced me to, but something cold and hard settled in my chest. Know my place. As if my worth was determined by where I'd chosen to work while building my real empire in secret. Around 9 o'clock, Charles called for everyone's attention. The room quieted as he stood beside the fireplace, brandy snifter in hand, every inch the patriarch addressing his domain. "Friends, family, thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate Marcus and Aria's engagement." Polite applause rippled through the room. I stood next to Marcus, his arm around my waist, playing the part of the grateful fiancé. But my mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, preparing for what came next. The Blackwood family has always believed in the importance of tradition, of maintaining the values and standards that have served us well for generations. Charles's eyes found mine across the room. "We welcome Aria into our family, confident that she understands and appreciates the responsibilities that come with the Blackwood name." More applause. Marcus squeezed my waist, probably thinking his father's speech was going well. I smiled and nodded, the picture of humble gratitude. "Of course," Charles continued, "joining any family requires certain adjustments, compromises, a willingness to put the greater good above personal ambitions." His smile was razor-sharp. "I'm sure Aria understands this completely." The room was quiet now, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to what was essentially a public declaration of my subordinate status. I stepped forward slightly, just enough to claim my own space. "Thank you, Charles. That's very kind." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become noticeable. I've always believed that true partnership is built on mutual respect and understanding. When both people bring their full selves to a relationship, their talents, their resources, their independence, that's when you create something truly powerful. The words hung in the air like smoke. Charles's smile flickered. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something had just happened but not quite sure what. Marcus laughed nervously. "Well said, babe. I think we're all just excited about the future." But I wasn't done. In fact, I was just telling Charles earlier about some of the investments I've been making. Small things, really, but I believe in contributing to our shared future in every way I can. Now Charles's smile was completely gone. "Investments. Nothing too complicated. Just some cryptocurrency trading I've been doing since college. And there's the Vermont property, of course. It's been quite the project, developing it into something special." I smiled sweetly. "I thought perhaps we could use it for family gatherings once we're married. It's quite extensive, about 100 acres with the main house, guest cottages, stables. Very private." The room was dead silent now. I could see Marcus staring at me with confusion, Charles with something approaching alarm, and his mother with the first genuine interest she'd shown in me all evening. 100 acres? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Well, yes. Grandmother left me the original property, but I've been expanding it over the years. You know how real estate can be if you make the right investments at the right time." I shrugged modestly. "The cryptocurrency trading has been quite lucrative. I've been able to diversify into several different sectors." Charles set down his brandy snifter with a sharp click. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Oh, there's no need for privacy," I said lightly. "After all, if we're going to be family, everyone should know what assets we're bringing to the table. Transparency is so important in relationships, don't you think?" I could see the wheels turning in Charles's head, recalculating everything he thought he knew about me. The room full of guests was watching our little drama unfold with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Besides, I continued, my voice carrying just a hint of steel beneath the silk, I'm sure the prenuptial agreement you prepared accounts for all possibilities. After all, a document that thorough must have considered that both parties might have significant assets to protect. Game, set, match. Charles excused himself shortly after that, claiming he needed to take an important phone call. Marcus disappeared with him, leaving me alone with a room full of people who were suddenly very interested in getting to know me better. I spent the next hour fielding questions about my investments and property development, giving vague but intriguing answers that left everyone wondering exactly how much they'd underestimated the waitress from nowhere. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. If anything, I just escalated a war that had been brewing beneath the surface for months. The question now was whether Marcus would stand with me or with his family when the real battle began. I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Around 11, as the last guests were saying their goodbyes, Marcus found me on the terrace overlooking the gardens. His face was pale, his usual confidence replaced by something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. "Arya, we need to talk." I turned to face him, noting how he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "About what?" "About everything. The money, the property, why you never told me." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "My father he's not happy." "I imagine not." I leaned against the stone railing, the cool night air sharp against my skin. It must be difficult when your carefully laid plans don't account for all the variables. "This isn't a joke, Arya. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Enlightened your family about my actual financial situation? Corrected some misconceptions? I'd hardly call that controversial." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "You've just made yourself a target. My father doesn't like surprises, and he especially doesn't like losing control of situations he thought he had handled. Then perhaps he shouldn't have tried to handle me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. He's talking about calling off the engagement." The words were meant to frighten me, to bring me back in line. Instead, I felt something like relief flooding through my veins. "And what are you talking about, Marcus?" He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want? Not your father, not your family, not the Blackwood legacy. You." I stepped closer, forcing him to finally look at me. "Do you want to marry me because you love me, or because I fit into the life your father planned for you?" For a long moment he didn't answer. And in that silence I found everything I needed to know. "It's complicated, Arya. You have to understand." "No," I said quietly. "It's actually very simple. Either you want to build a life with me as an equal partner, or you want to acquire me as an accessory to the life you've already chosen. There's no middle ground." He looked lost, a grown man who'd never had to make a decision that wasn't pre-approved by the family board of directors. "Can't we just compromise? Sign the agreement, keep the peace, figure out the details later?" "The details?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, those details are my autonomy, my independence, my right to exist as something other than an extension of your family's will. You're asking me to sign away who I am for the privilege of becoming who you think I should be. But if you really have all this money, does it even matter? You could sign the prenup and still be financially independent." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for months. He still didn't understand that this wasn't about money. It was about respect, about being seen as an equal rather than a beautiful problem that needed solving. "It matters," I said simply, "because it's the principle. Because if I start compromising on who I am now, where does it end? What's the next thing your family will ask me to sacrifice for the sake of keeping the peace?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out at the manicured gardens his great-grandfather had designed. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, defeated. "My father says if I don't get you to sign the agreement, he'll cut me off from the family trust." "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I need you to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about us, it's about my future, my career, everything I've worked for. Everything he'd worked for. As if being born into wealth and privilege constituted work. As if maintaining his position in a dynasty he'd done nothing to build was an achievement worth sacrificing our relationship for. I see. I turned back toward the house, suddenly exhausted by the entire conversation. Well, then I suppose you have a choice to make. Arya, wait. But I was already walking away, my heels clicking across the terrace stones like a countdown timer running out. Behind me, I heard him call my name again, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't just be a variation on the same theme. He wanted me to make myself smaller so he could remain comfortable. I collected my purse from the main hall, said polite goodbyes to the lingering guests, and walked out the front door of the Blackwood mansion. My car, a modest Honda Civic that fit perfectly with my carefully constructed image, was waiting in the circular drive. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. But I wasn't looking back anymore. I was already 3 moves ahead, and tomorrow the Real game would begin. My apartment was a study in deliberate mediocrity, nice enough to avoid suspicion, modest enough to maintain the illusion that I was just a hard-working girl trying to make it in the world. The furniture was from IKEA, the art was from Target, and the only hint of my real financial situation was the high-end security system I'd had installed and the sophisticated computer setup hidden in what appeared to be a simple home office. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine, and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated dozens of investment accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and property holdings that told the real story of Arya Wright. Not the waitress Marcus thought he was saving, but a self-made millionaire who'd been playing a different game entirely. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. How did it go? Better than expected, I typed back. They showed their cards completely. Ready for phase 2? I smiled, taking a sip of wine. Send the counterproposal in the morning. Let's see how much the Blackwood family really values tradition when it's their autonomy on the line. What the Blackwoods didn't understand was that I'd been preparing for this moment since the day Marcus first brought me home to meet his parents. Every condescending comment, every assumption about my background, every attempt to make me feel grateful for their acceptance had been carefully catalogued and converted into strategy. They thought they were dealing with a naive girl who could be bullied into submission. Tomorrow, they'd learn they were facing someone who'd built an empire while serving them coffee with a smile. And by the time I was finished, they'd understand exactly what it meant to underestimate Arya Wright. The war was about to begin, and I intended to win. The next morning arrived gray and cold, fitting for what I had planned. I'd been awake since 5, not from anxiety but from anticipation. This was the day everything changed, the day I stopped pretending to be less than I was and started being exactly who I'd always been beneath the carefully constructed facade. I chose my outfit carefully, a black blazer over dark jeans, professional but not trying too hard. My hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup. I wanted to look like someone who had nothing to prove because she'd already proven everything that mattered. Victoria's office was in the financial district, 43 floors above the city in a glass tower that screamed success. I'd been financing her practice for 3 years, ever since she'd helped me structure my first major investment. She was brilliant, ruthless, and had grown up poor enough to understand exactly why I wanted to destroy people who used money as a weapon. "Tell me you got it all recorded," she said as soon as I walked into her office. I set my phone on her mahogany desk and hit play. Charles Blackwood's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Sign it, or there won't be an engagement to celebrate tonight." Followed by Marcus's pathetic addendum about how it was for the best. Victoria's smile was predatory. Perfect. Coercion, duress, and intimidation all in one neat little package. She opened a thick folder on her desk. "This is our response. 42 pages of legal precision that will make their prenup look like a crayon drawing." I flipped through the document, admiring the elegant way Victoria had constructed each clause. Where their agreement sought to limit my financial independence, ours required full transparency of all Blackwood family assets. Where theirs included morality clauses designed to control my behavior, ours demanded equal treatment and representation in all family business decisions. My favorite part is Section 12, Victoria said, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. If the marriage is dissolved due to infidelity, abuse, or coercive behavior by the Blackwood family, you're entitled to 50% of Marcus's trust fund as compensation for emotional damages. And if they refuse to sign? Then we go public with everything. The recorded coercion, their history of financial intimidation with previous partners, and a few other interesting details I've uncovered about the family's business practices. She slid another folder across the desk. Did you know Charles Blackwood has been using family trust funds to cover losses from his private gambling addiction? Or that the family foundation has been reporting charitable donations they never actually made? I felt a chill of satisfaction run down my spine. How did you find all this? Money leaves trails, and rich people get sloppy when they think they're untouchable. Your little revelation last night about your actual net worth scared them enough to start making phone calls. Panicked phone calls to lawyers, accountants, private investigators. She leaned back in her chair. They're trying to dig up dirt on you, Arya. They just don't realize you've been digging deeper and longer. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, we need to talk. Can you come to the house this afternoon? I showed the message to Victoria. Showtime. Showtime, she agreed. Want me to come with you? No. This is something I need to do alone. I stood, collecting the folders and tucking them into my bag. But have your phone ready. If this goes south, I want everything documented. The drive to the Blackwood estate felt different this time. Yesterday I'd been playing a role, smiling and nodding while they tried to diminish me. Today I was going as myself, all of myself, for the first time in 3 years. Marcus met me at the front door, and I could see immediately that he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with red. Arya, thank God you came. We need to fix this. Fix what exactly? He led me through the house to his father's study, where Charles was waiting behind an enormous oak desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. The prenup from yesterday was spread out in front of him, along with several legal documents I didn't recognize. Arya, Charles said without preamble, we seem to have had a misunderstanding last night. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, crossed my legs, and waited. This business about investments and property, surely you understand how that complicates our arrangement. I understand that it complicates your plans, I said calmly. I'm not sure how it complicates anything else. Charles's jaw tightened. Don't be naive, my dear. When two families join together, especially families with significant assets, there are considerations that go beyond simple romantic attachment. You mean when one family absorbs another? I mean when we create a partnership that protects everyone's interests. I reached into my bag and withdrew the folder Victoria had prepared. Funny you should mention partnership. I've had my attorney draw up some revised terms that should address your concerns about protecting everyone's interests. I slid the document across the desk. Charles picked it up with obvious reluctance and began to read. I watched his face cycle through confusion, alarm, and finally, rage. This is preposterous, he said, slapping the papers down. You're asking for access to family business information dating back 20 years. Full disclosure of all trust fund activities. Equal representation on the family foundation board. His voice rose with each point. You're essentially demanding to be treated as an equal partner in enterprises you have no claim to. I'm asking for the same level of transparency and respect you're demanding from me, I replied evenly. After all, if we're going to be family, shouldn't we all know what we're getting into? Marcus had been silent through this exchange, but now he leaned forward. Arya, this is insane. You can't seriously expect my father to agree to these terms. Why not? They're essentially the same terms your family tried to impose on me, just with the power dynamic reversed. I smiled sweetly. Unless you think there's something inherently different about my position that makes such demands unreasonable when applied to me but not to you. Charles stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the gardens. This is extortion. This is negotiation. Your family opened the discussion by demanding I sign away my autonomy and financial independence. I'm simply responding with an alternative proposal. I lean back in my chair. Of course, if you'd prefer to proceed without any prenuptial agreement at all, I'm perfectly comfortable with that option. Absolutely not, Charles snapped. There will be a prenup or there will be no wedding. Then I suppose you'll need to decide which of these two options you prefer. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could see Charles calculating, trying to find an angle that would give him back control of the situation. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Finally, Charles turned back to face me. You have 48 hours to sign the original agreement. If you don't, the engagement is off. I stood slowly, collecting my copy of their prenup and my counterproposal. Charles, I think you misunderstand the situation. You don't get to give me ultimatums anymore. I walked toward the door, then paused. You have 48 hours to sign my agreement. If you don't, I'll be releasing some very interesting information about your family's financial practices to several major news outlets. You're bluffing. I turned back to face him, and for the first time since I'd known him, I let him see exactly who I really was beneath the carefully constructed facade. Try me. Marcus caught up with me in the hallway. Arya, please. You're destroying everything. No, Marcus. I'm refusing to be destroyed by it. I stopped walking and faced him directly. This is who I really am. This is what I'm actually capable of. If that destroys what we had, then what we had was never real to begin with. But I love you. You love the version of me that made you feel powerful and important. You love having a beautiful girlfriend who is grateful for your attention and never challenged your assumptions about how the world should work. I smiled sadly. But I'm not that person, and I never was. I've been playing a role because I thought you might be different from your family. I thought underneath all the privilege and entitlement, there might be a man who could see me as an equal. I do see you as an equal. No, Marcus. You see me as someone who should be grateful to be considered almost equal. There's a difference. He opened his mouth to argue, but I was already walking away. I'd said everything that needed to be said. Now it was time to see if the Blackwood family was as smart as they thought they were. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and my laptop, watching the cursor blink in the email composition window. The subject line read, Blackwood Family Foundation, an investigation into charitable fraud. The body contained links to financial documents, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of questionable transactions spanning the past 5 years. The recipient list included reporters from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and 3 investigative journalists who specialized in exposing financial corruption among wealthy families. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. The Blackwood family would be facing federal investigations, public scrutiny, and the complete destruction of their carefully cultivated reputation. My phone rang. Marcus. Arya, please, you have to give us more time. My father he's considering your terms. Is he? Yes. But you have to understand, this is a lot to process. We're talking about fundamentally changing how our family operates. You're talking about treating your future daughter-in-law with basic respect and dignity. If that represents a fundamental change, then perhaps the problem is bigger than you realize. There was a long pause. What do you want from us? I want you to choose me over your fear of your father. I want you to stand up and say that our relationship is more important than maintaining a power dynamic that turns marriage into ownership. I took a sip of wine, tasting the irony. But mostly, I want you to realize that I never needed you to save me. I was always capable of saving myself. And if we sign your agreement? Then we see if we can build something real together. Something based on actual partnership instead of you doing me favors. And if we don't? I looked at the email on my screen, at the delete button that could make all of this go away, at the send button that would detonate everything. Then tomorrow morning, the world learns exactly what kind of people the Blackwood family really are. Another long pause. Then, I need to talk to my father. You have 12 hours, Marcus. After that, the decision gets made for you. I hung up and closed the laptop. Either way, I was done pretending to be someone I wasn't. Either way, Arya Wright was finally going to be exactly who she'd always been underneath the performance. And honestly, I was looking forward to finding out which version of myself I'd be tomorrow. The answer came at 6 a.m. with a knock on my door. I opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, holding a thick envelope. "We signed it," he said simply. "All of it. My father's signature, my signature, everything you asked for." I took the envelope, feeling the weight of victory and something else I couldn't quite name. And I realized something last night while my father was raging about how you'd outmaneuvered him. Marcus stepped closer, and for the first time in months, he looked like the man I'd thought I was falling in love with. I realized I was proud of you. Proud that you were strong enough to fight back, proud that you didn't let us diminish you, proud that you're exactly the kind of person who would never let anyone push her around. Even when the person doing the pushing is your family? Especially then. He smiled, and it was real this time, not the practice charm he used at dinner parties. "My father said you're dangerous." He's right. You're dangerous to anyone who thinks they can control you. And that's exactly what I want in a partner. I looked at him for a long moment, searching for signs of the weakness that had disappointed me so much over the past few days. What I found instead was something I'd never seen before: respect. "The engagement party is tomorrow night," he said. "Assuming you still want to be engaged to someone whose family just spent the last 24 hours learning they've been underestimating you for 3 years. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I suppose that depends. Are you asking because you want to marry me, or because your father told you to?" "I'm asking because I just spent the night watching the woman I love destroy everything I thought I understood about power and control, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning what else I don't know about you." It wasn't perfect. There would be more battles, more moments when I'd have to choose between keeping the peace and staying true to myself. But for the first time since I'd met Marcus Blackwood, I felt like I was dealing with a man instead of a boy. "Ask me again," I said. "What?" "Ask me to marry you. But this time ask me as an equal." He dropped to one knee right there in my doorway, taking my hand in both of his. "Arya Wright, will you marry me? Not because it fits into anyone else's plans, not because it makes financial sense or protects family assets, but because I want to build a life with someone who's stronger than I am, smarter than I gave her credit for, and brave enough to fight for what she believes in." I looked down at him, this man who'd finally learned to see me clearly, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not the desperate relief of someone who'd been waiting to be chosen, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd chosen herself first and found that it led to something real. "Yes," I said. "But I keep my name, I keep my accounts, and I keep the right to destroy anyone who tries to make me smaller than I am." "Deal." He stood and kissed me, and for the first time in our entire relationship, it felt like a beginning instead of a performance. But this story doesn't end with a wedding. It ends 6 months later, in a boardroom 40 floors above the city, where I'm presenting the quarterly reports for the Blackwood Foundation, now operating with full transparency and actually donating the money it claims to give away. Charles sits at the far end of the table, his face a mask of barely controlled irritation as I detail how we've restructured the organization to eliminate the financial irregularities that had been draining funds for years. The foundation has increased its actual charitable giving by 340% while reducing administrative costs by 15%, I say, clicking to the next slide. We've also implemented new oversight protocols that ensure every dollar is tracked from donation to distribution. One of the board members, an old family friend who'd initially opposed my appointment, raises her hand. "Arya, these improvements are remarkable. How did you identify so many inefficiencies so quickly?" I smile, remembering the months I'd spent analyzing their financial records while they thought I was just the pretty girlfriend who didn't understand money. Sometimes an outside perspective can reveal problems that have become invisible to people who've been working within the system for too long. After the meeting, Charles approaches me as I'm packing up my presentation materials. "I underestimated you," he says quietly. "I thought you were after our money." "I was never after your money, Charles. I already had more than you do." I close my laptop and look at him directly. "I was after respect. The right to be treated as an equal partner instead of a beautiful acquisition. And now? Now I have both." I shoulder my bag and head toward the door. Amazing what happens when you stop trying to control people and start trusting them to contribute. He doesn't respond, but I catch him watching me leave with something that might actually be admiration. Marcus is waiting in the lobby when I get downstairs, leaning against a marble pillar with 2 cups of coffee and a grin that's become my favorite sight in the world. "How'd it go?" "Your father complimented my work." "Seriously?" I think he's finally figured out that having a strategic partner is more valuable than having a decorative accessory. We walk out into the afternoon sunshine, and I realize that somewhere in the process of fighting for my right to be myself, I'd actually found something I didn't know I was looking for: a relationship built on genuine partnership instead of performance. "So," Marcus says as we head toward our car, "ready to go home and plan our actual wedding? The one where nobody signs anything except the marriage certificate?" I laugh, remembering the prenup buried somewhere in a filing cabinet, its clauses ensuring that both families' assets remain separate while creating a framework for true partnership. "Actually, I was thinking we should honeymoon in Vermont. I'd like to show you the property your family was so eager to dismiss as minor holdings." "The 100-acre compound?" "The 150-acre compound. I bought the adjoining ranch last month." I grin at his expression. "What? You didn't think I was done expanding, did you?" As we drive away from the financial district toward the life we're building together, one based on honesty instead of assumptions, partnership instead of control, I think about the girl I was 3 years ago. She was smart enough to build an empire in secret, but she wasn't brave enough to demand that people see it. She played small to make others comfortable, hoping that being less threatening would somehow make her more lovable. But playing small never makes you safe. It just makes you invisible. And I was done being invisible. The real victory wasn't getting Marcus to choose me over his family's expectations. It was learning to choose myself first, completely and without apology. Everything else, the respect, the partnership, the love that didn't require me to diminish myself, followed naturally from that choice. Some stories are about finding yourself. This one is about refusing to lose yourself, even when everyone around you is invested in your transformation into someone more manageable. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference. 3 years later, I'm standing in that same wine cellar where this all began, but this time I'm the one calling the meeting. The new family prenup we've drafted isn't for Marcus and me. We've been happily married for 2 years now, but for his younger sister Caroline, who just got engaged to a hedge fund manager who thinks the Blackwood family tree grows money. "Sign it," I say, sliding the document across the same antique oak table where Charles once tried to intimidate me into submission, "or there won't be access to the family trust." Caroline's fiancé looks exactly like Marcus did 3 years ago, entitled, comfortable, and completely unprepared for the idea that anyone might challenge his assumptions about how power works in this family. "This is ridiculous," he blusters. "Why should I have to prove my financial independence to marry Caroline?" I lean back in my chair, Charles's old chair, which I inherited when he retired and I took over as head of family financial operations. Because this family learned the hard way what happens when you assume someone's weakness without bothering to verify it. Marcus, who's been quietly reviewing the investment reports I prepared for today's meeting, looks up with a grin. "Trust me, man. Sign the papers. Fighting her is like bringing a knife to a nuclear war." "But..." "No buts," Caroline interrupts, her voice carrying the same steel I recognize in my own. "If you want to be part of this family, you prove you're bringing something to the table besides good looks and charm. That's how we do things now." I watch her fiancé's face cycle through confusion, indignation, and finally, grudging respect. He's starting to understand that the Blackwood family he thought he was marrying into doesn't exist anymore. We rebuilt it from the ground up, with new rules based on mutual respect instead of inherited privilege. Fine, he says, reaching for the pen. But I want my lawyer to review this first. Of course, I agree graciously. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. As he signs his name on the document that will require him to maintain his own career, contribute equally to household expenses, and treat Caroline as a full partner rather than a beautiful dependent, I catch Marcus watching me with that look he gets when he's remembering how we got here. Proud of yourself? He murmurs as Caroline's fiancé finishes the paperwork. Proud of us, I correct. All of us. We took a family that measured worth by submission and turned it into one that values strength. Later that evening, after Caroline and her now properly humbled fiancé have gone home to discuss their new understanding of what marriage in this family actually means, Marcus and I sit on the terrace of our Vermont compound, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Do you ever miss it? He asks. The version of us that was simpler? I consider this seriously. There had been something seductive about the early days, when love felt like being chosen rather than choosing. When I could pretend that being desired was the same thing as being valued. No, I say finally. Simple isn't the same as good. We were simple because I was hiding and you were assuming. What we have now is complicated because it's real. He reaches for my hand, threading our fingers together. I love complicated. Good, I say, smiling as I watch our vineyard stretch toward the horizon, the vineyard I bought and developed while his family thought I was just another pretty face looking for a rich husband. Because I'm just getting started. The war I thought I was fighting 3 years ago wasn't really about prenups or family power dynamics. It was about the right to exist fully, to take up space, to be seen and valued for everything I actually am instead of everything someone else needs me to be. And the thing about winning that war? Once you know you can fight for yourself and win, you never have to make yourself small again. You can build empires, change families, rewrite the rules of engagement. You can be exactly as powerful as you actually are without apology or permission. And that, I've discovered, is the only way to live.